Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your shot in the arm for everything motivation, inspiration, and education on your path towards success with myopia management. And I've said since the very beginning of this podcast, if you want to grow organically into the expert you were always meant to be, you need to be aware of what's happening in our industry. It's one thing to offer myopia management. It's one thing to gain skill and experience and comfort, but you should also know what's happening in our industry. And the thing about the myopia industry is there's always something new happening with myopia management. And this episode is dedicated to the top stories of 2025 for myopia management. And I have brought on the co-editors of Review of Myopia Management, Dr. Ashley Tucker and Dr. Kevin Chan. Both are amazing optometrists, incredible orthokeratologists, and myopia management specialists. And the Review of Myopia Management, if you haven't checked it out, you definitely needs to be part of your regular digest of information, because they provide us with, on the spot coverage of what's happening in our industry. And if it's important in myopia management, Review of Myopia Management is covering it. So Ashley and Kevin, welcome to the Myopia Mindset.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you for having us.
All right. We're going to be covering a set of articles that, if I'm not mistaken, was basically decided by coverage on the website. What would, I guess, the most read articles on the Review of Myopia Management for 2025. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And before we get started, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. We'll start with you, Kevin. If anybody wants to get in touch with you about anything we've talked about in this episode, how can they do so?
Sure. Feel free to go on to the Review of Myopia Management website or email me directly at kevinchan.od@gmail.com.
All right. And same for you, Ashley.
Yes. So it's Ashley, ASHLEY.W.Tucker, TUCKER @gmail.com. And I just want to reiterate, you can go to the RMM website and there's a link to our emails.
Yeah, definitely. And I will provide a link to every article that we discuss in this episode in the show notes so that you can follow along. And also, if myopia management is important to you the way that it is for us, consider supporting the podcast. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you can do so. And you can get in touch with us at myopiamindset@gmail.com. All right, let's get started. The first article is the proliferation of myopia management spectacles by Philip Chang. He's an Australian optometrist, if I'm not mistaken. The article explains how modern spectacle lenses designed for myopia management have rapidly expanded beyond traditional single vision glasses. And Ashley, we're going to start with you because I found this article, it's a bit outdated, but it's a great moment in the progression of myopia management spectacles, because in other parts of the world, they had access to this technology way before we got this Stellus FDA authorization. So what can you tell us about this article?
Yeah, so I think what's so exciting about this article is just the title, the proliferation of spectacles. So there's hope there. There's, intrigue about what could potentially be coming to us. So this was written back in May. So we had no idea, just a few short months from there, that we would have our first FDA approval with the Stellus lens. One thing that I love that Philip said in this particular article is that in his practice, anybody that chooses spectacle lenses will basically automatically go into a myopia control spectacle. And that is what we all aspire for. I think that is such a great model, a great aspiration. So that really touched me when he said that that's the standard of care in his own practice. But he went on to review a couple of the big players. So the Hoya MyoSmart, which is the DIMS lens, so defocus incorporated multiple segment lens. That study, it's a 6-year trial, showed that the myopia was slowed by 62% on average compared to kids who were in a single vision lens. The Essilor Stellus, which is the lens that we currently have available to us, it's the HALT design, highly aspherical lenslet target design. also slowed axial elongation by about 60% versus the single vision lens. So those two are pretty comparable. And then we have the sight glass lens, which is quite different. It is based on the contrast theory. So just we expect a reduction in axial elongation, not by defocus, but a decrease in contrast to the peripheral retina. Unfortunately, the Cypress study, it got good results, but it was in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So they weren't able to get as promising of results as they would have liked, but they are continuing on with their eucalyptus study. I know that because I'm a PI for that study, but soon we'll have great data for that lens as well. I really love that he then went on to talk about a little bit of a personal experience at the Shanghai International Optical Fair, where he saw dozens of different designs that were pretty impressive. Some of them touted really high efficacy, but in the big scheme of things, there wasn't a whole lot of research behind some of these designs. But it's exciting to know that companies are excited about controlling myopia. There are a lot more on the horizon, and that we have a lot to look forward to here in the US.
Right. And it kind of represents that shift of, the standard of care for myopia management. I thought it was interesting in the article when he meant the mention of that practitioners must critically evaluate lens evidence when prescribing myopia management spectacles. Can you go more into that?
So can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the part about practitioners must critically evaluate lens evidence when prescribing myopia management spectacles, as not all marketed lenses deliver clinically proven outcomes. So are we looking at a future where we're going to have this deviation between, I guess, more efficacious myopia management or effect from spectacles?
Gotcha. So what we can for sure say is the ones that are being looked at in the US, so the MyoSmart, the Stellus, the sight glass lens, those are all going to have comparable pieces of data backing them. So what he is referring to is that there's all of these new vendors, these new manufacturers, especially in China and other countries, that are touting that same sort of evidence and same sort of defocus, but there is no clinical backing. There's no trials behind them. So not all lenses are created equally. Like these lenses that we know about are very well thought out, very well structured, well backed, and anybody can say that there's defocus in these lenses. So we have to do our due diligence and make sure we're prescribing things that are evidence-based and not just kind of running on the coattails of other things.
Right. Yeah. And speaking about like our next article, which was written by you, Ashley, the title is Now What? Turning Essilor Stellus Approval into Action. Let's use that as a transition. Recently, at the time we're recording this, we did have the Stellus FDA authorization in the United States. So can you go more into your article after the other one? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was so pumped. I don't. Kevin and I, we're with RMM. We have a lot of information coming towards us, and this really caught me by surprise. Kevin, I don't know about you, but I was shocked that this came to the market what seemed like overnight, and it was just really exciting. There was a lot of question on how this was going to be implemented into everyday practice. So my challenge in this editorial perspective was just to not just be excited, but to actually put this call of action into action. This is a great entry point into myopia management. A lot of us are intimidated by orthokeratology, by maybe even a pharmaceutical therapy, but none of us should be intimidated by prescribing spectacles. So my messaging in this article, and Kevin likes this quote, so I'll just read it. The science brought Stellus to the market. Our implementation will define its success. And that's true. That's my own quote, but it really resonates with me to this day because lots of doctors are still not really knowing exactly where to place these lenses, but we just got to get started. We have to just prescribe this as standard of care and take on what Philip, kind of encouraged us to do. If we're going to prescribe glasses, they really should be myopia control spectacles and not single vision.
Yeah. Kevin, what is your take on the Stellus FDA authorization?
Yeah, so definitely I echo with Ashley's perspective. And to piggyback on this, my personal take on this is that, a lot of clinicians are still not just to be hesitant, but also take Stellus or just the realm of myopia control spectacle as the entity. or merchandise. And sometimes it could be a misnomer to take this as a merchandise because, as Philip have written in the previous article, saying that we all need to treat each individual type of design, specifically, because every individual type of design can actually interact or add on a different type of optical defocus signal that will actually kind of shape how the axial link is going to respond over time. So the take-home message from this, in my perspective, is do not simply just take it as a merchandise and assume, this stylus glass would work for every individual. And in fact, you do need to take a precaution, and sometimes you need to take a step back in order to evaluate whether this is truly the good fit. Just because it's available doesn't necessarily mean like it will be efficacious for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a weird double-edged sword with the myopia spectacles. Ashley, to your point, this is like an entry level option for anyone who wants to start doing myopia management, and that's a huge benefit. But then there's all of these other factors that come along with it, right? Like, are the kids wearing the lenses for the requisite amount of time? They basically have to wear them all day. And then there's also like, are they positioned correctly on their face? Like compliance is a huge factor in all of this. So I really love the piece, and I think it's really like this great moment in time that we can kind of record and capture right now as more and more of these lens technologies come out in the United States. All right, let's go to the next article. Kevin, I'm going to throw this one over to you. The article is called How to Manage Progressive Myopia in Young Adults by Iman Azgul. I think this is a really cool article because when I was working with J&J and we with the Ability lens, of course they're putting treating children with orthokeratology, but when they found success with it, you would have the parents or the adults of these pediatric patients be like, well, can I do ortho K? Can I, when can I start wearing these lenses? And I think this is a great article about how to work with, late teens and adults when it comes to ortho K. Kevin, what can you tell us about this article?
Yeah, so this article by Iman School, I think this is a really cool article in a way that we all have been under the assumption that, adult doesn't progress, with myopia over time. And by the time they hit certain age, which is true, but not applicable for all individual in all population, particularly in our Asian population, they tend to, mature a little later. So in this article, the author have actually touched upon the basics of, what myopia in adulthood looks like. And typically, based on the statistic, they're saying that there are about 12 to 13% of individual aged from 18 to 19 tend to still having the progression of refractive error by more than half a diopter per year. So that's considered pretty significant, considering how old they are and how mature the eyes has become. And in my clinical and adult experience, I've seen some young adult, especially when we practice longer and longer, we definitely see a lot more young kids progress to become a young adult in our chair. So definitely, I see a portion of young adult who's still progressing over time, and based on the article, the author have comment on what should we look out for and how to put a caveat on those adult myopia cases. And just because age could be the determining factor should not preclude you from pursuing ongoing myopia management for those population. And the author specifically noticed that if in order to make myopia management effective is to be a long-term and collective effort for all individuals, not just the patient, not the young adult, not the parent, not a clinician themselves, but also a collective effort. In order to do that, the author have commented that we have to manage myopia just like manage for someone who are younger, with proactive approach and be open-minded, be able to change our mindset a little bit more fluidically. And my personal take on this is that, again, that is definitely an overlooked population in our generation. And a lot of young adults are still progressing, especially if they're going to college. They tend to have a lot more demand in neo work. And as we all know, study have found that near work coupled with the lack of outdoor time can be the contributing factor for axillary elongation. So that is something that is like just a good reminder for all clinicians and all parents to understand that just because you're a kid, enter college doesn't mean you automatically would, disqualify or, be walk away from this treatment. So definitely there's certain, benefit going forward, even when they turn 20s or mid 20s. And usually my closing message for parent when they ask me this question is that if you want to become a good eligible candidate for refractive surgery, for example, no matter what type of refractive surgery, you do need to establish a really good baseline and good progress in the past couple of years in order to become an eligible candidate. I don't want to disappoint patients, but if they ask me about 17 to 18, I will probably recommend them to kind of hold off, observe a little longer while they're still undergoing this type of treatment until they're early 20 in order to reassess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And, I love how, if you're a young adult doing ortho-K or doing myopia management, all of the normal things apply, getting outside and managing your screen time. All the usual suspects are there. That's all still very, very important. I thought it was interesting in the article when it said that atropine eye drops, while effective in children, currently lack solid evidence for slowing progression in older teens and adults. So it was a very thorough article. I thought that was fascinating. Okay, let's go to the next piece. I'm going to kick this one over to you, Ashley. This is comparison of performance of myopia control spectacles in European children. This was by Dwight Ackerman. And we were just talking about in the last couple of articles where we mentioned myopia spectacles. And this article reviews a retrospective cohort study comparing two evidence-based myopia control spectacle designs in European children and adolescents aged 6 to 17 years who wore either type of lens that was in the study and for at least 2 years. So what can you tell us about this article specifically?
Yeah, sure. So this was a research review, which I'll plug Kevin and I. We both do one every month. So this is a great way to get current information, but maybe in a little bit more of a compact layman's term. So I love these research reviews. So what made this one especially interesting is you alluded to this, Matthew, is that most of these studies, myopia studies, I shouldn't say most of them, a big chunk of them are done on Asian children, specifically Chinese children. So it is really interesting to see this done in a different cohort, so European children. So it was a retrospective cohort study of individuals 6 to 17 years of age, and they compared wearing the MyoSmart lens to the Stellus lens. Short and sweet, they basically found that they are equally effective. So clinicians can feel pretty confident choosing between either one of these. Currently, all we have here in the US is the Stellus lens, so that choice is really easy for us. But I've often wondered what people that have access to all of these different designs, what is their differential? Like, how do they choose? Is it a price thing? Is it an availability thing? Kevin, do you have any sense of what our Canadian colleagues are doing because they have so many different choices?
Yeah, so not just Canadian, but also European colleagues.
Yeah, for sure.
In a lot of like European country already have access to all this type of crazy, intriguing defocus signal. I personally do not know what the criteria are, and I think it's more about the availability and the clinician preference. What they have, what kind of success they have been doing for each type of design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next couple of articles. Kevin, I'm going to kick this one over to you because it's about red light therapy. This article is called "The Latest in Red Light Therapy" by Dr. Zung Tran. This article reviews the rapidly growing evidence around repeated low-level red light therapy as a novel intervention for myopia control. And red light therapy, ever since we first heard about it, has been this really headline setting topic because of, what kind of results they've got from it. And then there's been some controversial elements around it. So what can you tell us about this article?
Yeah, so Matthew, so this article is written in Australia as well. I don't believe they have access to red light therapy yet, but there's been a lot of circulating evidence showing that it's been used in Asia and some Southeast Asian country. So what in this article, what the author has tried to deliver is to try to investigate what kind of treatment effect can be delivered by the red light, low-level red light therapy. And specifically, the author have pointed out a couple randomized clinical trial, one of which actually shows that over 69% of those patients have shown reduction of axial length elongation with the use of RLRL in a 12-month period. And specifically, they also look into some sort of ocular changes and what kind of refractive error nuances that has been shown based on current clinical trial. And what they found was not only does this slow down the axial elongation, but some study actually found that some individuals have shortened the axial length by more than 0.3 millimeter changes, and with a slight hyperopic shift in the refractive error. But those individuals are mostly have moderate to high myopia changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very intrigued, specifically when the author have touched upon the pathophysiology of how RLR actually work and interact with the eye. Because, when I first touch upon this subject, to be honest, I'm not really comfortable with the idea of putting laser on a fragile young eyes. That is kind
Right.
of scary and kind of like skeptical to me. But the more I read about it, study have actually found there's some scientific basis on that. Specifically, the RRL have shown to enhance the choroidal blood perfusion or circulation, which seems to be able to slow down or reduce the scleral hypoxia. When we have scleral hypoxia taking place, the scleral collagen tend to strengthen a little more over time, but there's been some studies showing that there's an age-dependent response. The younger the kids are, obviously the sclera will be more fragile, more malleable, and chances are they will be progressing no matter what we do. Versus young adult, when they get to teenager or young adulthood, the sclera tend to mature a little bit more and more. So that tells me that the RRL may be more catered towards the teenage and young adulthood more likely, more effectively. And more importantly, this article have also comment on an aspect of like what would if we combine the treatment together. For example, if we can combine red light therapy specifically with some type of myopic control spectacle or soft contact lenses with multifocal design. What could be the outcome possibly? And the author actually found that is very fascinating. And not every combination therapy work equally and efficaciously. And specifically, when they found the axial length changes for those patients undergoing combined therapy with RRL and the dim spectacle lenses, they found there's a bit more clinical efficacy compared to many other combination therapy. So I found it very fascinating. But at the same time, I think as a clinician, I still try to put a caveat that not every kid should be considered red light therapy, and there's a I think the next article would be touch upon the potential safety concern about why this matter, despite all the robust data showing RRL actually works for patients.
Yeah, let's go into the next article. A wake-up call: regulatory changes for red light therapy in China, and this was written by Dwight Ackerman. So yeah, just go right into that one as well.
Yeah, so I think the reason why Dwight have touched upon this article is, just like how I put it, whenever we have the new technology available in the market, there's a viral feed, there's a frenzy about talking about this, how can we can implement it for our patient. Obviously, we put patient the first, that's great. But at the same time, I think as a clinician, we need to be able to stay cautious and be skeptical, I put it optimistically skeptical about each type of new technology, no matter how simple they are. Specifically, this author by Ya-Xing Wang, this research group have found that they're actually all ophthalmologists in China in different provinces. And they collectively found that, RRL, even though they have posed their own clinical efficacy, for children with myopia. And back in 2022, I believe, they actually launched this technology in the market as a class 2 device. What that means is that, class 2 device doesn't have to go through a lot of vigorous or extensive clinical trial or approval in order to being launched in the market. That's pretty easy to do. But starting in 2023, there's a regulation called the NMPA. They actually try to reclassify this type of RRL device as a class 3 instead of class 2. What it means is that, class 3 device tend to have a bit more stringent and more vigorous regulatory oversight for that type of product. So going forward, I think in summer 2024, RRL device, when they have no class device approval, they cannot be launched in the market in China. So that actually is a good and bad, double-edged sword. On one hand, it seems like we're taking away the new technology back on square one, and we have to start from scratch. But at the same time, I think we have to also be concerned about the moral and ethical dilemma, about how can we draw the balance between, on one hand, we can advance the medical innovation, for a patient, but at the same time, we also need to ensure there's enough, safety data to support, for our patient safety. So I think this article is really well written, and it's kind of summarized the pros and cons, what kind of caveat we need to be concerned about. It's not a one side, sweet and rosy picture for everyone, but we do need to kind of be cautious and be mindful about what is out there and how we can utilize those products, responsibly.
Right. Yeah. And let me kick this over to both of you. So Ashley, feel free to jump in as well, because I'm always curious about what it's going to take for red light therapy to come to the United States, assuming that everything can get buttoned up about, the safety and approval of the technology. And what would it take for it to be brought into your practice specifically, or maybe generally speaking, the average practice in the United States? Like, what would that look like? What would it take?
I have a really hard time with this technology. As much as I read about it, as much as I see that there are studies that support its safety and efficacy, but more so safety, it's still, like Kevin alluded to in the beginning, it just doesn't seem like a good idea. I know it is a shortcut to outdoor time, and I know that outdoor time isn't always a feasible option for families, but I just think we have better options that are safer, have much more time behind it's the safety profile here. So I don't know what it would take, Matthew. It would have to take a lot. And the trial behind taking it a lot just seems dangerous for the children that are getting, the placebo, or I don't know. This does not seem ethical to me personally.
Yeah. Kevin, do you agree with that?
I think the controversy is also about, like, if it takes so much time for even a matter of spectacle to be approved.
Exactly.
Let alone as a laser, with a strong, energy level, for the macula, for the fovea. And many of you have already seen, some case reports showing that there's some cases showing the maculopathy resulting from RRL, even though they're reversible. But still, it's a really risky concern. We don't want to take a chance, and a lot of litigation would come follow us. If it doesn't go well.
Yeah, you both are making great points, and Ashley, to something you said about a shortcut to outdoor time, and it's like the practice I grew up in. We don't want a shortcut outdoor time. Like, there's so much value in outdoor time. And I really think that, like, I find it difficult to see a place for red light therapy in the American market in here in the United States. All right, well, that's it for this regular version of the episode, but the discussion doesn't stop here. It actually continues in an extended version of this episode, which is available to our Substack supporters. You can, if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. And for the cost is $12 a month, which is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. And that's how I like to put it. Listen, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each and every week to nerd out about myopia, to bring on amazing guests, to spread the word about how awesome myopia management is and how more ECPs should be engaged in this specialty, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You can do so on our Substack. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you do that. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'll see you at the next one.